What happens when your safe harbor becomes the storm itself? Kate never imagined that a burst pipe would lead her straight to Henry's penthouse. Her best friend, her boss, the man she'd carefully kept at a safe distance for years. But when he opened that door, wearing nothing but a tight t-shirt and low-slung sweatpants, something shifted. The air between them grew heavier. Their gazes lingered longer. And when he stepped out of the shower that first morning, water still dripping down his chest, she realized the truth she'd been hiding, even from herself. Some desires don't stay buried forever. This is the story of two people who thought they knew each other until they started living under the same roof. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, click the super thanks button too. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing you stories that move you. The smell of old coffee and damp wood filled Kate's small apartment as she stood in the doorway, watching the plumber shake his head with that universal expression of bad news. Water pooled around her feet, seeping from beneath the bathroom door like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. Her landlord had already made it clear repairs would take at least 2 weeks, maybe 3, and she needed to leave. Now, Kate Morrison was 32 years old, had a solid career as a project manager, and a carefully organized life where every piece had its place. She wasn't the type of person who improvised. But there she was, with a suitcase open on the bed, throwing clothes in without thinking, feeling her heart race with that uncomfortable sensation of losing control. The timing couldn't have been worse. It was early December. The city was packed, and every decent hotel was charging outrageous prices because of the holiday season. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Henry, of course, it would be him. "Kate, I heard about the apartment. Come stay with me." His voice was firm, leaving no room for discussion. Henry Blake wasn't just her best friend of 8 years. He was also her boss, the CEO of the company where she worked, and the only person who could read her thoughts before she even voiced them. They'd met at a conference in Boston when he was still building the company, and she was just a junior analyst trying to impress. There was an immediate connection, but always safe, always within the boundaries of friendship. "Henry, I can't just—" "Yes, you can. I have 3 empty bedrooms. And before you say you'll look for a hotel, I already checked all the ones in the area. They're fully booked." She laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "You didn't do that." "I didn't. But it worked, didn't it? Come on. No drama." And that's how, 4 hours later, Kate found herself in front of Henry's building, a glass and steel tower in the heart of Manhattan, holding 2 suitcases and a strange feeling in her stomach. The inciting incident wasn't just the burst pipe. It was the decision to accept his invitation, to cross that invisible line they'd always maintained between them. The elevator rose silently to the top floor. When the doors opened, she could hear jazz music playing softly, something instrumental and smooth that seemed to float through the hallway. The penthouse door was slightly ajar. "Henry, come in. I'm in the kitchen." She pushed the door open and was greeted by a space that looked like it came straight out of an architecture magazine. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the illuminated city, minimalist furniture in shades of gray and white. But what really captured her attention was Henry coming out of the kitchen with 2 wine glasses in hand. He looked different, or maybe she'd never really paid attention. The white t-shirt was tight enough to show the contours of his chest, his broad shoulders, the defined arms she'd never noticed under his impeccable office suits. The gray sweatpants sat low on his hips, revealing a line of tanned skin that disappeared beneath the fabric, bare feet, dark hair slightly tousled, as if he'd run his hand through it absent-mindedly. Kate held her breath without meaning to. "Wine?" He extended a glass, smiling in that casual way that always made her feel at home. But there was something different about the smile, too. Something slower, more intentional. Yes, thank you." She took the glass, her fingers brushing against his for a second longer than necessary. The main conflict was already established, even if neither of them wanted to admit it. How to keep their friendship intact when their bodies insisted on reminding them they were a man and a woman alone, sharing the same space. How to ignore years of carefully controlled tension when there were no longer walls separating them. "Let me show you the room." Henry placed his hand lightly on her back, guiding her down the hallway. The touch was casual, but she felt every millimeter of it. Her skin burned through the thin blouse. The guest room was spacious and welcoming, with a king-size bed covered in pristine white sheets, a huge closet, and a private bathroom. Through the window, New York's lights twinkled like fallen stars. "It's perfect," she murmured, setting the suitcases on the floor. "Henry, seriously, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me." He leaned against the door frame, crossing his arms in a way that made the muscles in his biceps stand out. "We're friends. That's what friends do." The word friends hung in the air between them like an unspoken lie. Kate took a long sip of wine, needing something to occupy her hands, to distract from the way his gaze traveled across her face with a new attention, almost studied. She knew every expression of his, every micro-expression. But this one was different. There was curiosity there, and something more dangerous, barely disguised desire. "You must be tired," he said finally, pushing himself off the door frame. "I'll let you get settled, but come down after. I ordered Thai food, that place you love." How did he always remember everything? When Henry left, closing the door softly, Kate let herself fall onto the bed, her heart beating too fast. She stared at the ceiling, trying to process. It was just 2 weeks, maybe 3. She could keep her composure. She could ignore the heat she felt when he touched her back. The way her stomach flipped when she saw that bit of skin at his waist. She could pretend nothing had changed, but deep down, she already knew the truth. Everything had already changed the moment she walked through that door. An hour later, they were sitting on the wide living room sofa, Thai food boxes scattered on the coffee table, a second bottle of wine already half empty. The conversation flowed easily, as it always had between them: work, inside jokes, office gossip. But there were pauses now, loaded. Silences where their eyes met and lingered longer than they should. "Did you change something here?" Kate asked, looking around. "Feels different." "I didn't change anything." Henry turned to her, his arms stretched along the back of the sofa, his fingers inches from her shoulder. "Maybe it's you who's seeing differently." The phrase had weight. They both knew it. "Maybe," she admitted quietly, taking another sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. Or maybe it was his proximity, the woody scent of the cologne he wore, the way the room's dim light made shadows dance across his face. Henry leaned slightly closer. Henry stepped forward, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. "Kate!" His voice was huskier, lower. She could feel her heart race. "What?" But he seemed to change his mind at the last second, looking away and smiling in an almost shy way, which was completely out of character for Henry Blake, the man who commanded meetings with investors without blinking. "Nothing, just, I'm glad you're here." Disappointment and relief mixed in her chest. What had she expected him to say? And more importantly, what did she want him to say? "Me too," she replied, and it wasn't a lie. They stayed there side by side, watching an old movie neither of them paid attention to. But Kate was hyper-aware of every movement he made. The way he stretched his legs, the way he ran his hand through his hair, the way his knee brushed against hers, and neither of them pulled away. When the movie ended, it was past midnight. Kate yawned, trying to hide the nervousness she felt. "I'm going to bed," she announced, standing up. "I have that early meeting tomorrow with the developers." "I know. I'll be there." Henry also stood, taller than she remembered, or maybe it was because he was so much closer now, much closer. They stood there in the middle of the living room, just one step apart. The city outside continued its dance of lights, but inside the apartment, the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Henry raised his hand slowly, as if giving her time to pull back, but she didn't. His fingers brushed her face, gently sweeping away a strand of hair that had fallen over her eyes. The touch was light, almost reverent, but it burned. "Good night, Kate." "Good night, Henry." She turned and walked toward the bedroom, feeling his gaze on her back with every step. When she closed the door, she leaned against it, eyes closed, breathing unevenly. What was happening and why? For the first time in 8 years, didn't she want to fight it? Outside, Henry remained standing in the same spot for long minutes, looking at the closed guest room door. He ran his hand over his face, letting out a long, frustrated sigh. Keeping that secret was getting harder and harder. And now, with her there, so close, so present. How was he going to survive the next 2 weeks without crossing the one line he'd promised himself he'd never cross? The first rays of Sunday morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, painting golden stripes across Kate's face. She woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. Henry's penthouse. The guest room that smelled faintly of lavender and expensive linen. The city outside already humming with life, even though it was barely 7 a.m. She stretched, feeling the tension from yesterday still coiled in her muscles. Not from the move, but from something else entirely, something she wasn't ready to name yet. Kate decided that coffee would be the perfect solution to clear her mind. She slipped on a short silk robe over her nightgown, something she'd packed without thinking much about, but that now seemed inappropriately revealing for the situation. But it was Sunday morning, and Henry was probably still sleeping. There was no reason to worry. She opened the bedroom door quietly and headed down the hallway toward the kitchen, her bare feet gliding across the cold marble floor. The apartment was quiet, wrapped in the peculiar stillness of weekend mornings. Through the immense windows, New York stretched out like an ocean of concrete and glass. But in here it was as if the world had paused. Kate was almost at the kitchen when she heard the sound. Water running, the bathroom door opening, steam escaping into the hallway, and then she saw him. Henry emerged from the bathroom as if he'd stepped out of a dream or a nightmare, depending on how much self-control she could maintain. He was shirtless, wearing only a white towel draped carelessly over his shoulder and gray sweatpants hanging dangerously low on his hips. Drops of water slid slowly down his neck, descending over his collarbone, gliding down his defined chest, tracing each abdominal muscle as if mapping every inch of tan skin deliberately. His dark hair was wet, messy, with some strands falling over his forehead. He was using the other towel to dry off absent-mindedly, the muscles in his arms flexing with the movement. The morning light hit him directly, highlighting every line, every contour, every detail Kate had never allowed herself to notice before. But now, she noticed. God, how she noticed. The air left her lungs all at once. Her entire body froze in the middle of the hallway, as if her feet had grown roots into the marble floor. She knew she should look away, move on, pretend she hadn't seen anything. But her eyes had a will of their own, traveling the length of that body as if memorizing something forbidden. And then Henry lifted his head and saw her. For a second, maybe two, maybe an eternity, they just looked at each other. The towel stopped in midair, halfway to his head. His eyes, dark honey-colored, fixed on hers with an intensity that made Kate's stomach knot tightly. She saw the exact moment he realized what she was doing. Saw the corner of his mouth curve into a slow, dangerous smile, completely aware of the effect he was having. "Sorry," he said finally, but there was no apology in his voice. There was something else. Amusement, perhaps, or challenge. "I forgot you were here, liar." He hadn't forgotten anything. Kate forced herself to breathe, desperately trying to recover some kind of composure. "I was going to make coffee." The words came out fragmented, disconnected. She cleared her throat. "To make coffee. Coffee, right?" Henry threw the towel over his shoulder again, taking a step toward her. One single step, but it seemed to shrink all the space between them. "Want me to make it?" "No." The answer came out too loud, too fast. Kate felt heat rise up her neck, coloring her cheeks. "I mean, you don't have to. I'll make it." He was closer now, close enough for her to smell the soap, something fresh and masculine that made her legs weak. Close enough to see the drops of water still caught in his lashes. Close enough to realize he was studying her face with the same attention she'd studied his body seconds earlier. "You sure?" Henry tilted his head slightly, his eyes quickly dropping to the silk robe that suddenly seemed too transparent under his gaze. "You look distracted." "I'm fine." But her voice was shaky. "Are you?" He took another step. Now he was too close, invading her personal space in a way that was both terrifying and electrifying. She could see the movement of his chest as he breathed. She could count every drop of water still sliding slowly down his skin. "Because you're blushing. I'm warm." The sound came deep from his throat, almost like a purr. "Iced coffee." Then Kate blinked, trying to process the words. "What? You said you wanted coffee? But if you're warm." He leaned in imperceptibly, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to slide over her skin like silk. "Maybe iced coffee would be better. With lots of ice." She swallowed hard. Her heart was beating so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Coffee with ice." "Yes, good idea." Henry smiled. That smile she knew, but that somehow seemed completely new. There was mischief there, intention, and something that made her entire body wake up, as if someone had lit a match to her nerves. "I'm going to get dressed," he said, but didn't move. He stayed there, so close that if she took a deep breath, their bodies would touch. "Unless you want me to stay like this." It was pure provocation, and Kate knew it. But she couldn't formulate a response that wouldn't completely give her away. "Change? You should change your clothes," she managed to stammer. "If you insist." He walked past her, so close that his arm brushed against hers. A brief electric touch that sent shivers down her entire spine. But before disappearing down the hallway, he stopped and looked over his shoulder. "Kate. Yes. You look different today, too." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the hallway, her heart racing, her legs trembling, and a feeling of heat in her stomach that had nothing to do with the apartment's temperature. Kate practically ran to the kitchen, bracing her hands on the marble counter, closing her eyes tight. What the hell was happening? They were friends, best friends. She'd known him for 8 years. They worked together, shared secrets, trusted each other with everything. But in that moment in the hallway, there was nothing friendly about the way he looked at her, and definitely nothing friendly about the way she looked back. She prepared the coffee on autopilot, her hands still slightly shaky. The machine hummed its comforting sound, and the rich, dark aroma began to fill the kitchen. Kate leaned against the counter again, trying to organize her thoughts. This was physical attraction. Just that. Brain chemistry reacting to visual stimuli. Completely normal. She was human. He was what she'd just seen. Any woman would have the same reaction, right? It didn't mean anything. It didn't change anything. But then why was her body still vibrating? Why could she still feel the ghost of his arm brushing against hers? Coffee ready. Kate almost dropped the mug. Henry entered the kitchen, now dressed. Black running shorts and a tank top that honestly didn't help much in her mission to regain mental balance. The thin fabric outlined every line of his torso. "Almost," she murmured, turning to the coffee machine as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. Henry approached, grabbing 2 mugs from the cabinet above her head. The movement made his body press lightly against her back, and Kate felt every inch of that contact through the thin robe. He didn't pull away immediately. He stayed there, his chest grazing her shoulders, his warmth enveloping her like a wave. "Have you always smelled like lavender?" His voice was right behind her ear, low and intimate. Kate closed her eyes for a second, fighting the urge to lean back, to let herself be completely wrapped up by him. "It's the soap I use. I like it." He finally pulled away, but his fingers brushed lightly against her waist as he grabbed the mugs. Accidental, intentional? She didn't know anymore. They prepared their coffee in silence, a heavy silence loaded with unspoken things. Kate added too much sugar to her cup and didn't even notice until she took the first sip and grimaced. Henry laughed. "Nervous?" "No. No." He leaned against the opposite counter, crossing his arms over his chest, his head tilted in an amused expression. "Because you just put like 4 spoonfuls of sugar in there. I like it sweet." "Since when?" "Since you came out of that bathroom and my brain stopped working properly," she thought, but she said, "Since today." Henry took a sip of his own coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. "You know what I think, Kate?" "What?" She tried to sound casual, but her voice came out tense. "I think you're running from me." Her heart jumped. "I'm not." You are. Ever since you woke up. He set his mug aside and took a step toward her. Then another. Why? I'm not, Kate. Her name in his mouth sounded different, softer, more dangerous. Look at me. She didn't want to. Looking at him meant admitting what was happening. Meant dropping the last protective barrier she maintained between them. But she looked anyway, slowly raising her eyes until they met his, and what she saw there left her breathless. Desire, pure, direct, undeniable. It was no longer subtext or suggestion. It was there, exposed like a silent confession. What's happening? She whispered. Henry moved closer, eliminating the space between them until she could feel the heat of his body. You know exactly what's happening. Henry, tell me you didn't feel it. He raised his hand, his fingers hovering inches from her face, not touching yet, but promising. Tell me that when you saw me this morning, you didn't feel anything. She should lie, should laugh, make a joke, break the tension. But the words didn't come because it would be a lie, and she'd never lied to him. She swallowed hard. I felt it. His smile was slow, triumphant. I know this can't happen. But even as she said it, her body was leaning toward him like a magnet without control. Why not? Because we're friends. Because you're my boss. Because it'll complicate everything. What if I don't care about any of that? His fingers finally touched her face, sliding along her jawline with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. Kate trembled under the touch. Henry, just tell me one thing. He leaned in, his lips so close to hers. She could feel his breath mixing with hers. Do you want me to stop? That was the question, wasn't it? The only one that mattered. She could say yes, could pull back, could save their friendship, keep everything on safe, familiar tracks, could pretend that moment in the hallway never happened, that her body wasn't begging for more, that she hadn't spent the last 8 years burying something that was now exploding to the surface like a dormant volcano. She could, but she wasn't going to. No, she whispered. I don't want you to stop. And then there was no more space between them, no more doubts, nothing else but the heat and the promise and the absolute certainty that they had just crossed a line from which there was no return. But Henry didn't kiss her. Not yet. He just smiled, that slow, dangerous smile, and whispered against her lips. Then I won't stop. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across Henry's kitchen as they stood side by side, pretending that the morning hadn't changed everything. Kate had suggested making dinner together. Something casual, something normal to restore the equilibrium that had been shattered the moment she'd seen him emerging from that bathroom. But normal, she was quickly learning, was no longer possible between them. The apartment smelled of sautéed garlic and fresh herbs. Kate had insisted on making risotto, something that required constant attention, movement, busy hands. Anything to create a distraction from the way her body still vibrated with the unfulfilled promise of that morning. He hadn't kissed her. He'd stood there so close she could count every eyelash, and then simply pulled back with that infuriating smile, leaving her suspended in a state of anticipation that, now, hours later, still pulsed beneath her skin. Henry was preparing the salad, his movements efficient and precise, like someone who knew what he was doing in the kitchen. But Kate noticed he was distracted, too. She saw it in the furtive glances he threw her way when he thought she wasn't looking, in the way his jaw tightened every time she passed close by, in the breathing that became slightly faster when their bodies approached. Henry's kitchen, despite being modern and spacious, suddenly seemed too small for the two of them. Every movement required negotiation of space. Every step put them in each other's way, and Kate was beginning to suspect that none of these encounters were as accidental as they seemed. I need to get the cheese, she announced, heading toward the refrigerator. Henry was right in front, cutting tomatoes. Excuse me, she murmured, trying to pass behind him in the narrow space between the kitchen island and the counter. He didn't move. Kate felt his body solid warm, immobile as she tried to squeeze through the tight space. Her back brushed against his chest. Her hips touched his for a second that seemed to stretch infinitely. She heard his breath catch, felt his muscles tense against her. Sorry, Henry murmured, but his voice was hoarse. Small space. Yeah, she agreed, but didn't pull away immediately. She stayed there, feeling his heat radiate through the thin layers of clothing. Her heart was beating so loudly, she was certain he could feel it against her back. When she finally managed to move and open the refrigerator, her hands were trembling slightly as she grabbed the Parmesan cheese. He didn't ask her to move out of the way. He should have, but he didn't. Instead, he simply approached from behind, his body enveloping hers as he stretched his arm up. Kate froze, the wooden spoon suspended in the air over the steaming pot. She could feel every inch of him pressed against her back. His broad chest, the firmness of his muscles, the heat that seemed to burn through the thin t-shirt she wore. "Excuse me," he whispered near her ear, so close his lips almost touched her skin. Kate closed her eyes, fighting the urge to lean back, to allow herself to melt against him. You could have asked me to move. I could have." His fingers brushed lightly against her waist as he grabbed the bottle of olive oil. The touch so light it could be accidental, but it wasn't. But where would be the fun in that? She turned her head, finding his face inches from hers. She could see the golden flecks in his eyes, the slight shadow of stubble beginning to appear at the end of the day, the way his mouth curved in that half-smile that was both provocation and promise. "You're doing this on purpose?" she accused, but there was no anger in her voice, just acknowledgement, and perhaps a thread of excitement she couldn't completely hide. "Doing what?" Henry tilted his head, feigning innocence, but his hand was still on her waist, his thumb drawing slow circles through the fabric. "You know exactly what I want. Hear you say it." Kate turned completely now, trapped between the stove and his body. The pot bubbled behind her, forgotten. The entire world seemed to have shrunk to that small space, to that moment suspended between them. "You're touching me," she said quietly. "On purpose. You're getting too close, invading my space, making you what, Kate?" He took another step closer, eliminating even that last inch of distance between them. Now their bodies were completely pressed against each other, and Kate could feel every muscle, every contour, every breath of his. "Making me want you," she admitted, the words coming out in an almost inaudible whisper. His smile disappeared, replaced by something more intense, more hungry. Good, because I'm doing it on purpose. Because I want you to. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't." His hand slid from her waist to her back, pressing her closer against him. "I'm tired of keeping my distance, of acting like you're just my friend. Like I don't think about you every night before I fall asleep. Like I don't want to." "Henry." His name came out like a moan, a plea. "Tell me you're tired of pretending too." Kate knew she should be sensible, should think about the consequences, about work, about the friendship they'd built over 8 years. But with his body pressed against hers, with his eyes burning into hers, with the promise of everything that could happen hanging between them like electricity. "I am," she whispered. "I'm so tired of pretending." His breathing grew heavier. His fingers moved up her back, slowly tracing the line of her spine through her shirt. Kate arched slightly, her body responding to the touch as if it had been waiting for this her entire life. "Have you always smelled like lavender?" he asked, his lips brushing against her temple. "You already asked me that this morning." "I know, but I can't stop thinking about it, about your smell, about how you must taste." He pressed his lips against her temple, then descended slowly down her cheek, leaving a trail of fire. "Let me find out." Kate should say no, should pull back, but instead, she tilted her head, offering her neck, giving silent permission. Henry accepted the invitation. His lips touched the sensitive spot just below her ear, then descended slowly along the line of her neck. Each kiss light as a feather, but burning like fire. Kate let out a trembling sigh, her hands instinctively rising to his shoulders, holding him, pulling him closer. "God, Kate," he murmured against her skin. "You have no idea how much I—" A loud hissing cut through the air. The pot, the risotto, was overflowing, white foam spilling over the sides as it boiled uncontrollably. They separated abruptly, reality returning like a shock of cold water. Kate spun quickly, turning off the heat, stirring the risotto frantically while trying to control her breathing. "Damn!" she muttered more to herself than to him. Henry ran his hand through his hair, letting out a low, frustrated laugh. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "Don't." Kate turned to him, still holding the wooden spoon like it was a weapon of defense against her own desires. "Don't apologize. I wanted it too. But we need to think. We can't just—" She gestured vaguely between them. "We have to be sure of what we're doing." Henry nodded slowly, but she could see the frustration in his eyes mixed with understanding. "You're right. Of course you're right." He took a step back, creating physical distance that neither of them really wanted. Let's finish dinner." They worked in silence after that, but it was a loaded silence, vibrant. Every movement was still pure awareness of the other. When their hands touched passing a plate, both held on for a second longer than necessary. When she tasted the risotto and made a small sound of approval, she saw his eyes darken. When he licked his thumb after tasting the salad, she had to look away, heat rising up her neck. Finally, they sat at the table with a view of the city. Dinner was perfect, the risotto creamy and flavorful, the salad fresh and crisp, the red wine opening in generous glasses. But neither of them seemed really interested in eating. "Kate," Henry began, swirling the glass between his fingers, "we need to talk about this. I know, because if we keep going like this, if every time we touch, it's like it was in the kitchen." He paused, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "I don't know how long I'll be able to control myself." Her heart raced. "And who said I want you to control yourself?" His glass stopped in midair. "Kate. 8 years, Henry. 8 years pretending there was only friendship between us. 8 years ignoring every look that lasted longer than it should. Every touch that felt warmer than normal. Every time my heart raced when you walked into the room." She leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "I'm tired of pretending, aren't you? You have no idea." He set the glass aside and stood up, walking around the table until he was beside her. He extended his hand. "Come here." Kate looked at his hand, strong, tanned, promising things she barely dared to imagine. Then she looked at his face, at those eyes that knew her better than anyone, at that mouth she'd wanted to feel on hers since that morning. She placed her hand in his. Henry pulled her up gently, their bodies becoming dangerously close again. But this time there was no boiling pot to interrupt them. No excuses, just the two of them, and the truth they finally could no longer deny. "Are you sure?" he asked, his free hand rising to brush the hair from her face, his fingers sliding across her cheek with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. "I'm sure I don't want to keep pretending anymore." "That doesn't answer my question." Kate placed her free hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating hard beneath her palm. "I'm more sure of this than I've been of anything in my life." And then finally, he pulled her even closer, wrapping her in his arms, and she let herself melt against him, their bodies fitting together like pieces that had always been made to join. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But they stood there embracing in the middle of the dining room, the city blinking outside, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. And in that embrace, there was promise of everything that was to come. Of all the touches that would no longer be accidental, of all the nights when they wouldn't have to hold back anymore. "Stay with me tonight," Henry whispered against her hair. "It doesn't have to be. We don't have to. Just stay. Sleep in my room. Let me hold you all night." Kate lifted her face, meeting his eyes. She saw vulnerability there mixed with desire. She saw the man she'd known for 8 years and the man she was only beginning to truly know. "Yes," she whispered back. "I'll stay." And when he finally kissed her light, soft, a sealed promise, Kate knew there was no going back. They had crossed the line, and she didn't regret it one bit. The city lights blinked like fallen stars beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. As Kate settled into the corner of Henry's massive sectional sofa, the fabric was soft against her skin, a deep charcoal gray that somehow managed to be both masculine and inviting. She'd changed clothes, leggings and an oversized sweater that slipped off one shoulder, and her hair was loose, falling in soft waves around her face. Henry was in the kitchen opening another bottle of wine. Kate could hear him moving, the familiar sound somehow comforting. They decided to watch an old movie, something in black and white that neither of them would mind losing track of because they both knew the movie wasn't really the point. The point was being together in that intimate space at that late hour of the night when defenses are down and truth has a way of emerging even in unspoken words. The lighting was low, just a few strategically positioned lamps, creating a cozy atmosphere. Through the windows, New York pulsed with its endless energy. But inside that apartment, the world seemed to have slowed to a more intimate, more personal rhythm. "I found that Malbec you like," Henry announced, entering the room with two generously filled glasses. He'd changed clothes too, now wearing a faded gray t-shirt that hugged his torso in a way that should be illegal, and black sweatpants that hung comfortably on his hips. Kate accepted the glass, her fingers brushing against his in a touch they no longer tried to disguise as accidental. "You always remember everything, only the important things." He sat down beside her, not too close, but not distant enough. The space between them vibrated with possibilities. The movie started, but Kate barely registered the title. She was hyper-aware of Henry's every movement beside her. The way he settled into the couch, one arm stretched along the back, his fingers inches from her shoulder. The way he drank his wine, his lips touching the rim of the glass with a slowness that seemed deliberate. The way, from time to time, she caught his gaze in the TV's reflection, not watching the movie, but watching her. 20 minutes passed, or maybe it was 10 or 40. Kate had lost track of time, lost in the acute awareness of how their bodies seemed to gravitate toward each other, even without conscious movement. She'd started leaning against the arm of the couch, but now she was closer to the center, closer to him. "Are you watching?" Henry asked, his voice low, almost a purr. "Huh." Kate blinked, realizing she had no idea what was happening on screen. "The movie? Are you paying attention?" Of course. But it was an obvious lie, and they both knew it. Henry smiled, that slow smile she was beginning to recognize as dangerous. "So tell me what just happened." Kate opened her mouth, then closed it. "I was distracted by what?" "By you," she thought. "By the way your shirt stretches across your shoulders. By the smell of your cologne mixed with wine. By the memory of your lips on my neck earlier. By the thought of where your hands could be right now if I let them." "Nothing specific," she said out loud, taking a generous sip of wine. The liquid was rich and full-bodied, sliding down her throat and leaving a pleasant warmth in her chest. Or maybe the warmth had nothing to do with the wine. "Kate." The way he said her name slowly, deliberately, loaded with meaning, made something tighten in her stomach. "HM, come here." It wasn't a request. It was an invitation, a choice. She could pretend she didn't understand, could maintain the safe distance, could keep watching the movie that neither of them was really seeing, or she could accept what they'd both wanted since she'd walked through that door. Kate placed her glass on the coffee table. Then, in a movement that felt both natural and terrifying, she slid across the couch, inching closer to him. Not completely touching, but close enough to feel the heat of his body and hear the subtle change in his breathing. Henry reached out, lightly touching her ankle. "Lie down here," he said. Her heart jumped. "What?" "Your feet," he murmured. "Put them in my lap. You said earlier your back was sore from the boxes. Let me give you a massage." It was an excuse. They both knew it. But it was an excuse Kate accepted gratefully. She lifted her legs and rested her bare feet in his lap. Henry's hands wrapped around her left ankle first, his thumbs gently pressing into the arch of her foot. The touch was firm, warm, skilled, like everything else about him. Kate let out an involuntary sigh, her head falling back against the couch cushion. "Good?" he asked, his voice husky. "Very good." And it was true. But it wasn't just the massage. It was the intimacy of the gesture, the casual way he touched her feet, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before, as if her body was familiar and welcome territory. His fingers worked methodically, pressing, caressing, sliding from heel to toes and back. Then he switched to her other foot, repeating the process with the same careful attention. But Kate noticed that gradually his hands began to move up. First, just to her ankle, then to her calf, his thumbs drawing slow circles on the back of her leg. Then, just below her knee, where the skin was more sensitive. Kate opened her eyes, finding him watching her with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. The TV was still playing, black and white voices filling the silence, but neither of them was paying attention. "Henry," she whispered, not knowing exactly what she was asking for. "Tell me to stop," he said, but his hands kept moving up, slowly, caressing the side of her thigh through the thin fabric of her leggings. "Tell me and I'll stop." But she didn't say it, couldn't, because the truth was, she didn't want him to stop. She wanted more. She wanted everything. Henry must have seen the answer in her eyes, because he moved. In one fluid, deliberate motion, he guided her legs to the side, making room to move closer. And then he was there, leaning over her, one hand braced on the couch back beside her head, the other still caressing her thigh. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his eyes traveling over her face as if memorizing every detail. "I always knew it, but seeing you like this here, with that sweater falling off your shoulder and that look in your eyes." He shook his head slowly. "You're killing me, Kate." "Then kiss me," she whispered, her hand rising to touch his face, her fingers sliding along the strong line of his jaw. "Please, kiss me." Henry closed his eyes for a moment, as if fighting himself. When he opened them again, there was something different there. A decision made, a line about to be crossed with no return. "If I kiss you now," he said, his voice so low it was almost a growl, "it won't be just a kiss. I know it'll change everything between us." "I know," she repeated, pulling him closer. "I want it to change." The distance between them shrank inch by inch, his breath mixed with hers. Their lips so close she could feel the heat, the promise, the weight of 8 years of restraint about to break. And then, when she was certain it would finally happen, when every cell in her body was vibrating in anticipation, Henry's phone rang, loud, shrill, shattering the moment like breaking glass. They froze, their lips millimeters apart. Henry let out a low curse, his forehead pressing against hers. "Ignore it," Kate whispered, desperate. "I can't. It's the Tokyo office. They only call if it's urgent." He pulled away, and Kate felt the cold take the place of his warmth. The frustration on his face mirrored exactly what she felt. Henry grabbed the phone from the table, answering with a curt, "Yes." That sounded more irritated than professional. He stepped away, walking to the window while speaking rapidly in Japanese, something about contracts and deadlines that Kate couldn't quite follow. She sat up, running her hands through her hair, trying to control her still racing breath. Her entire body was tense, vibrating with unsatisfied desire. Part of her wanted to laugh at the irony. After 8 years, after finally being at the right moment, the universe decided to interrupt. But another part of her, the rational part that had been systematically ignored since that morning, whispered that maybe it was a sign, that maybe they were moving too fast, that there were consequences to consider, conversations to have, certainties that needed to be established before they crossed that final line. Henry returned 15 minutes later, phone still in hand, his expression frustrated. "Sorry, we have a crisis with the product launch over there. I need to deal with it." "I know." Kate stood up, smoothing her sweater. "Go work. I'll go to my room." "Kate." He caught her wrist as she passed him, pulling her back. His eyes were dark, intense, full of unspoken things. "This isn't over." "I know. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. We talk for real about everything." "About us?" she asked, her voice small. "About us," he confirmed. And then, because apparently he couldn't completely hold back, he pulled her into a quick but tight hug, pressing his lips to the top of her head. "Sleep well." Kate nodded against his chest, inhaling that scent that was already becoming addictive, wood, and something subtly spicy. Then she forced herself to pull away, to walk toward the guest room, to put physical distance between them before her resolve completely broke. At the door, she stopped and looked back. Henry was still there, watching her with an expression that was both promise and torment. "Henry," she called. "Yes. You almost kissed me." A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Almost. Next time." He leaned in slightly. "Next time there won't be an almost, Kate. Next time I won't stop." And with that promise burning between them like fire, Kate entered the room and closed.